The locker stood in the far corner of the maintenance room, half buried behind a pushcart draped in gray canvas, and a shelf of cleaning supplies that no one had touched in years. It was dented along the top, the blue paint gone nearly white from decades of institutional light, and its handle had been wrapped in black electrical tape at some point before the building's last remodel. From where Garrett Slade stood in the doorway, it looked like every other forgotten thing he had walked past in his life. He should have kept walking. Hector Villanueva did not look up right away. He was on one knee beside a mop bucket, wringing the handle dry with hands that moved the way old hands do, careful and deliberate, nothing wasted. He was 68 years old, built narrow through the shoulders but solid at the base, and his gray uniform bore the kind of wear that only comes from genuine daily use. His hair was cut close and gone almost entirely white. There was a curved scar along his left forearm, faint and old, and a small laminated cross clipped to his collar that he touched briefly when he finally looked up and saw the man in the doorway. Bo did not move from Garrett's left side. The dog held perfectly still, ears forward, body low and watchful, reading the old man with the focused calm that Garrett had learned to trust over 4 years of working together. Bo was a German shepherd, nearly 90 pounds, and the particular shade of his coat was a deep sable, with a charcoal saddle running the full length of his back. His eyes were dark, alert, patient in the specific way that working dogs are. Patient, which is to say not peaceful, but compressed. He made no sound. Hector Villanueva set down the mop handle. He looked at the dog, then at the man, and something in his face did a quiet thing that was not quite a smile. "I was wondering," he said, "if you would come back. This is the story of what was inside that locker. If stories like this one matter to you, take a moment right now and subscribe, and stay until the very end, because the end of this one is worth waiting for." Garrett had driven 11 hours to reach Grayfield, Tennessee, and he had done it without stopping except once for gas, and once because Bo needed water and a few minutes of movement. The town was not large. It sat in the eastern part of the state at the base of a ridgeline that turned purple in the late afternoon, and it had the particular quality of places that were once something other than what they are now, older industry having been replaced by a kind of proud, quiet patience. There was a textile plant on the southern end of town that had closed before Garrett was born, and a newer distribution warehouse near the highway that kept several hundred people employed in the surrounding county. The downtown was 4 blocks of brick storefronts, some occupied and some not, and a county courthouse with a flagpole in front that flew both flags, the state and the national, and they were both clean and correctly maintained. Garrett was 41 years old. He stood just over 6 feet, and he carried the particular kind of weight that comes from years of physical work rather than a gym, wide through the chest and arms, but not exaggerated, with a long, deliberate way of walking that suggested he had crossed enough difficult ground to have stopped thinking about it consciously. His face was weathered beyond his years, dark from sun and cold, with a jaw that sat a little tight and eyes the color of old iron, pale and precise and very still. He had a short beard that was going gray at the chin, and his hair was clipped close on the sides and only a little longer on top. He wore a dark jacket over his service clothes, not the dress uniform he had folded and carried in a flat case in the back of the truck, but the everyday clothes of a man who had not stopped being a Marine even when he was not wearing the title. He had left the Corps 2 years ago, a gunnery sergeant with 19 years of service, and a medical board finding that had been, in his private estimation, approximately 60% accurate. The rest was easier not to discuss. He had spent those 2 years moving, mostly, working contract security in 3 different states, staying in extended-stay motels or in the back guest room of people who owed him something from before. He had not stayed anywhere longer than 6 weeks. Bo had gone everywhere with him. The reason Garrett was in Grayfield, Tennessee, was a letter. It had caught up with him in mid-October, forwarded twice before it found its way to the garage apartment he was renting in Knoxville. The return address was the Grayfield County Veterans Services Office, and the letter inside was 2 paragraphs long, typed on plain paper, and signed by a woman named Doris Caffrey, who identified herself as a volunteer coordinator. It said that a man named Hector, employed as a custodian at the Grayfield Regional Veterans Center, had presented the office with a collection of items he wished to return to their rightful owner. The items, the letter said, were personal military effects belonging to Gunnery Sergeant Garrett A. Slade, United States Marine Corps. The office had spent 4 months locating him. Ms. Caffrey said she understood if travel was not possible and offered to arrange secure postal delivery. She also said in the second paragraph that Mr. Villanueva had asked specifically if Garrett might be willing to come in person. He did not explain why. Garrett had read the letter twice, standing in the kitchen of the garage apartment, and then set it on the counter and gone out to sit with Bo in the yard for a while. The things the letter described as personal military effects included, by implication, objects he had not seen since the spring of 14 months before his medical discharge. Objects that had been in a wall locker at Camp Lejeune that he had cleaned out in a hurry during a period when he had not been in any condition to do things carefully. He had believed those objects were gone. He had spent some time in the early months of the Knoxville apartment, deciding whether to believe they were gone or to believe something had happened to them that he did not want to think about too directly. He was in Grayfield 3 days after receiving the letter. The Veterans Center was a long single-story building set back from the main road, built in the early 90s and updated enough to look cared for without looking new. There was a covered entrance with a ramp and a flagpole and a modest sign. Garrett had parked in the lot and sat in the truck for perhaps 4 minutes, Bo watching him from the back seat with that precise, attending stillness. Then he had gotten out and gone in. The woman at the front desk, who was not Doris Caffrey, but a younger volunteer named Sandra, had walked him back through 2 hallways with the kind of quiet respect that people in veteran centers often learn, a measured and unpressing attention that does not require explanation from the person being helped. She had stopped at the door to the maintenance corridor and said that Hector was usually in the equipment room at this hour, and she had pointed, and she had left him there. That was how he had come to be standing in the doorway, looking at an old man on his knee beside a mop bucket and a dented blue locker in the far corner. Hector stood slowly, the kind of slow that is not weakness but precision, a man who has learned to protect what still works. He dried his hands on a folded rag from his pocket. He studied Garrett with dark eyes that were calm and careful and accustomed to reading people quickly. A man did not work in a veterans center for 11 years without learning to read people quickly. "You didn't have to come all this way," Hector said. His voice was low and clear, carrying the accent of West Texas, where he had grown up, flattened some by decades in Tennessee. "The letter said you asked," Garrett said. Hector nodded as if that were sufficient. He did not rush. He crossed the room to the locker and stood beside it for a moment, resting one hand on the top. Bo tracked him the whole distance with those dark eyes, and then, when Hector stopped and stood still, the dog sat down. That was enough for Garrett. He had learned to read Bo the way a pilot reads instruments, not because the dog was infallible, but because the dog was consistent, and a consistent signal was more valuable than a complicated one. Bo rested, which meant this man was not a threat, which meant whatever came next would be honest. "I found them about 14 months ago," Hector said. Donation bin. Back of the building. The bin gets dropped off at the county thrift store once a month. I pull it out of the truck the night before it leaves, and I go through it. Because sometimes people put things in there they don't mean to, or they put things in there because they're having a hard time, and they would want them back if they weren't having such a hard time. A lot of veterans come through here. A lot of them go through hard times. Garrett said nothing. The room was warm and smelled of floor cleaner and something faintly metallic. This was in a cardboard box, Hector said. Sealed with tape. Had your name on the outside, just the last name, in handwriting that was going fast. I opened it to see if there was contact information inside. He paused. There wasn't. Just the things. So I put them in here, and I started trying to find you. Took you 14 months? You move around, Hector said without judgment. The veteran services people, Doris especially, she did most of the finding. I just waited. He turned to the locker then and worked the combination. 3 numbers Garrett could not see, and pulled the door open. The interior was clean. Hector had lined the shelf with a piece of cloth, a square of dark green fabric that looked like it had been cut from an old uniform. And on that cloth there were 3 items. A shadow box, its glass intact, housing 2 medals and a citation folded small behind them. A folded photograph in a clear plastic sleeve, and a challenge coin, sitting separate from the others, turned so that the eagle globe and anchor faced up. Garrett's chest went somewhere else for a moment. The shadow box held a Purple Heart and a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. He had been given the first one in a field hospital in Helmand Province in 2009. He had been given the second at Camp Lejeune in 2018. Both had been presented in ceremonies. Both had been present for his career and should have been present for the rest of his life. He had packed them. The night he cleaned out his locker, in a condition of mind that he was not proud of and did not revisit often. He had not meant to put them in a donation bin. He did not remember putting them in a donation bin. There was a period of approximately 3 weeks in which he did not remember a great deal of things clearly, and that period included the day he emptied the locker. He stepped into the room. He reached past Hector without asking, which Hector permitted, and lifted the shadow box. The glass was clean. The medals were exactly as he remembered. The citation was folded in the same direction. He had folded it himself. You found my name on these, Garrett said. On the citation. Yes, sir. Garrett set the shadow box down carefully. He picked up the photograph in its sleeve. It was a picture of 2 men in desert utilities, one of them younger and identifiable as Garrett by 20 years, and the same iron eyes. The other a broader man with a mustache and a laugh that was visible even in the still image. His name was Danny Reyes, and he had died in Helmand Province, which was part of the context surrounding the first medal, and not a story Garrett told very often. I didn't know what that was, Hector said quietly. Just that it went with the rest. It does, Garrett said. He set the photograph down and picked up the coin. It was heavy, the kind of weight that a challenge coin builds by being held often. One side showed the eagle globe and anchor. The other side, which he turned to see, showed the crest of his battalion and a date in small text. It was the coin his platoon commander had pressed into his hand on the day he made gunnery sergeant. In a moment that had also been witnessed by Danny Reyes, who had whistled once through his teeth when the rank was read out and then gone quiet, the way Danny did when something mattered. Garrett set the coin down and straightened up and stood there in the warm maintenance room with its smell of cleaner and metal, and he did not say anything for a moment. Hector said nothing either. He was the kind of man who understood that some silences needed to complete themselves. Bo got up from where he had been sitting, crossed the room, and pressed his shoulder against Garrett's left leg. 14 months is a long time to hold on to someone else's things, Garrett said finally. Didn't feel that long, Hector said. Felt like the right thing. He said it simply and without performance, and Garrett believed him. They sat in the small break room down the hall for the better part of an hour. Hector made coffee from a machine that required exact patience with its settings, and he made it correctly. And he brought 2 cups and set one in front of Garrett, and then reached under the counter and produced a collapsible bowl which he filled with water and set on the floor for Bo, a gesture so matter-of-fact and considerate that Garrett noted it without commenting. Hector had come to Grayfield in 1991, following a woman he had married in El Paso who had family here. The marriage had lasted 9 years and produced 2 daughters who still lived in the county, both grown now, one with a family of her own. He had worked at the Veterans Center for 11 years, after a stretch in the county maintenance department, and before that a long time in commercial plumbing. He was not a veteran himself. His father had been Korea, Army, and had come home speaking rarely about what he had seen, and dying in his sleep at 72 with a photograph of his unit in his wallet that Hector had found only at the end. That, Hector said, was why he worked here. I wanted to be around people who came back, he said. Didn't matter from where. I just thought somebody ought to be around. Garrett drank his coffee. It was good coffee, which surprised him somewhat, and the break room had a window that looked out over the rear parking lot, and beyond it a strip of tree line going bare in the late October cold. You work here every day, Garrett said. Most days. You do this often? Go through the donation bins? Hector considered. Once a month, when it's about to leave, and whenever something goes in that I didn't see go in. We have a drop slot in the lobby. People put things through at night. Sometimes you come in the morning, and there's something in the box that you can't be certain was meant to be there. Garrett thought about the word meant. It was a careful word to use. Not accidentally, not carelessly. Meant. Do you find things often, he said, that weren't meant to be there? Often enough, Hector said. A flag, a couple times. Service ribbons once, a whole set. A letter from a son to his father that had never been opened. Been in the man's pack the whole deployment, and the pack ended up here after he passed. He paused. I have a system for that. Names go to Doris. Doris finds people. And if she can't, then I keep the thing until she can. Or until I'm sure nobody's coming. And then I decide what's respectful. He said it without ceremony, just a plain statement of how he ran a moral operation. And Garrett had the particular feeling of being in the presence of someone whose goodness was not something they talked about, because it had never occurred to them to wonder whether they were good. It was just what they did, the way water moves downhill without deliberating over the direction. Bo had finished his water and was now lying with his chin on the floor, watching Hector from across the room with an expression that was as close to contentment as the dog ever looked in an unfamiliar place. He likes you, Garrett said. Hector looked at the dog. He's not sure yet, he said. But he's being polite about it. That was so accurately observed that Garrett almost said so. He didn't. He finished his coffee. Before he left, he wrapped the shadow box in a flannel shirt from his truck and set it carefully in the case he had brought for the dress uniform. The photograph he kept in the chest pocket of his jacket, against his ribs, the way he had carried things before when carrying things carefully, mattered for tactical reasons. The challenge coin went into the front left pocket of his pants, where he kept nothing else. He shook Hector's hand at the entrance. The old man's grip was firm and brief and direct. You come back through Grayfield, Hector said. You know where to find me. Garrett said he would. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, but he meant it with more weight than the 3 words suggested. He drove back through the small downtown, and he did not get on the highway immediately. He turned instead and sat for a while in the parking lot of a diner called Patton's, which had a green awning and a hand-painted sign, and the kind of steam on its windows that suggested warmth inside. Bo was in the back seat, watching him. The challenge coin was in his pocket. He had touched it twice already without intending to. The thing about the coin, the thing about all 3 objects, was not that they were irreplaceable in any material sense. The metals were documented. The citation existed in a file in a federal record system. The photograph was the only one that could not be reprinted, but it had existed in his memory so completely for so long that losing the physical object would not have meant losing the memory. The thing about the coin was that Danny had been there when it was placed in his hand, and Danny had been dead for 15 years, and the coin was the last object he possessed that had been in that room at that moment, and its absence from his life had been, for the past 14 months, something he had not allowed himself to examine too closely. He sat in the parking lot until the steam on the diner windows made him want to go inside. He went inside. The woman behind the counter was named Patty, which he learned from a name tag that was the hand-lettered kind, and she was in her middle 50s with gray streaks in her dark hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head and the efficient, warm-hearted manner of someone who had fed people for long enough that feeding people was a form of care she had stopped distinguishing from love. She brought Bo a bowl of water without being asked, setting it just inside the door where the dog could reach it without crowding the entrance. Garrett ordered coffee and a bowl of beef stew that arrived with a thick slice of cornbread on the side, and he ate it slowly at the counter because the counter had a view of the street, and because he was not ready to stop sitting somewhere that felt, in its small but specific way, like a place where a person could rest. 2 men at a table behind him were discussing the lumber prices at the county co-op. A young woman near the window was reading something on her phone with the focused expression of someone trying not to cry in public. The radio was playing something country and unhurried. Outside, a maple tree at the edge of the parking lot was dropping its last red leaves in a slow, deliberate way, 1 or 2 at a time. He was on his 2nd cup of coffee when Patty refilled it, without being asked, and said, "You're not from here." "Knoxville," he said, "more or less." "That's not a from," she said pleasantly. "That's a currently." He looked at her. She looked back with the steady patience of someone who had made that observation before, and was curious what the particular person in front of her would do with it. "Tennessee," he said. "Originally, different part?" "Where?" "Hawkins County." She nodded as if that made a certain kind of sense. "Long drive to Grayfield for a bowl of stew," she said. "I had something to pick up at the Veterans Center." Something in Patty's expression shifted slightly, not with pity, but with the specific attention of someone who understood what that sentence could mean. "Hector found you," she said. He looked at her again. "He comes in here," she said, "Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He's been talking about trying to find a veteran named Slade for a few months now. I don't mean that he broadcast it. I just pay attention." She set the coffee pot down and folded her hands on the counter. "He's a good man." "I noticed," Garrett said. She did not say anything else about it. She refilled the cornbread without charging him, and talked instead for a few minutes about the ridgeline to the east, and how it looked different in every season, and how October was her favorite because of the red, and then a family of 4 came in, and she went to seat them. And Garrett finished his coffee in the particular quiet of a warm place filling slowly with people who belonged to each other. He was at the register paying when Patty said, without looking up from the change he was counting, "He works mornings, gets there at 6:30, leaves at 2, in case you wanted to know." He took his change. He thought about asking her what she was suggesting. He did not ask because he knew, and she knew he knew, and asking would have made it smaller. He drove north out of town and found a highway motel with a pet-friendly sign and took a room on the ground floor. He set the shadow box on the dresser. He sat on the edge of the bed and held the challenge coin in his palm for a while, turning it in the light. Bo climbed up onto the bed, which he was not technically supposed to do, and lay down beside him. Garrett let him stay. He lay awake for a while after the lights were off, listening to the dog breathe beside him, watching the occasional fan of headlights cross the ceiling when a car passed on the highway. He thought about a room at Camp Lejeune, and a cardboard box, and a stretch of time he had spent trying to not exist, in the way that people sometimes do when everything closes at once. He thought about Danny Reyes, who had never done anything slowly in his life, and had died quickly, and had been the kind of man who was present for things that mattered to other people without ever making a production of the fact that he was there. He thought about Hector kneeling by a mop bucket and lifting a dented locker handle wrapped in electrical tape, the laminated cross on his collar, the green cloth he had cut and laid on the shelf. He thought about Worth. He was back at the Veterans Center at 8 the next morning. Hector was in the main corridor, pushing a supply cart toward the meeting rooms. He stopped when he saw Garrett at the entrance and nodded once, the nod of a man who is not surprised. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Garrett said. A pause. Bo sat down. "You need something?" Hector asked. "I wanted to ask you something," Garrett said. "About the things. About the system you mentioned, for names and contacts and finding people." Hector set the cart handle down and waited. "Doris Caffrey," Garrett said. "The volunteer coordinator. How long has she been doing what she does?" 12 years, Hector said. "Started the year after I did." "How many people has she found?" Hector thought about it. "Hundreds," he said. "Not all of them wanted to be found. Some of them, you find them and they say thank you and don't come back. That's fine. That's their right." "And some of them come back," Garrett said. "Some of them," Hector said, "stay." He said it plainly the way he said everything, not as a pitch. Not as an invitation that could be declined with embarrassment. Just a fact he was reporting about how things sometimes went. Garrett noted that Hector did not look at him when he said it, but turned slightly toward the supply cart, as if confirming the count of paper towel rolls. "The center does what, exactly?" Garrett said. "Besides the donation bins?" "Benefits navigation," Hector said. "Claims assistance, resource referrals, housing, employment, mental health liaisons, 2 of them Tuesdays and Thursdays, group meetings, Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings, visiting programs for veterans in the county who can't get here on their own." A pause. "We need drivers for that. The visiting program. We've got more veterans in the county than we've got drivers." Garrett looked at him. "I'm not a veteran," Hector said. "The drivers have to be volunteers with a clean record. The center does the background check." "You said you need drivers." "Always," Hector said. "It's the thing we never have enough of. People to go out to the houses and sit with people who don't leave anymore. A lot of those veterans are old. Older than me?" He paused again. "Some of them just want somebody to sit with them. Don't have to talk. Just somebody in the room who gets something of what they went through." Garrett looked at the supply cart, which held cleaning products and a new roll of electrical tape, which he noted without particular reason. "I could do that," he said. "For a while. While I'm here." Hector looked at him then, directly for a moment. "For a while," he said. "I have a room at the Ridgeview Motel," Garrett said. "It's week to week." Hector nodded slowly. "Doris will want you to fill out some paperwork," he said. "She is serious about the paperwork." "I can do paperwork. The background check takes 3 to 5 days." "That's fine." Hector picked up the cart handle. He had the expression of a man who does not let himself become visibly pleased about things, but whose eyes carry the information anyway. He started pushing the cart again down the corridor. "I'm here until 2, he said, not looking back. "Lunch is at 12:30 in the break room. Patty sends over food on Tuesdays." "It's Thursday," Garrett said. "It is," Hector agreed. "But there are leftovers." That was the closest thing to humor Hector offered, and it landed in the corridor like a door held open. Garrett stayed. He drove to the motel that evening and called the Knoxville landlord and gave proper notice on the garage apartment. He spent the following 3 days in the Ridgeview room, taking Bo out twice a day on a road that ran parallel to the ridge, which turned a different shade of purple each evening as the sun moved. He ate at Patton's on the second morning. He did not eat at the counter. He took a table near the window and watched the street, and Patty brought him coffee and cornbread again, and did not make him talk about anything. On the 5th day, he received a call from Doris Caffrey herself. She had a voice that was brisk and warm in equal measure, the voice of a woman who had organized large amounts of complicated human need for a long time and had neither burned out nor gone numb. She told him his background check had cleared and asked when he could start the visiting program orientation. He said Monday. She said Monday at 9, and she said it in a tone that suggested this was the beginning of a schedule, not the end of one. The first veteran he drove to see was named Ray Owens, 84 years old, a Korean War Army corpsman who lived in a house at the end of a gravel road 7 miles east of town, in a hollow with a creek running at the back of the property. Ray was not much of a talker. He had a bird feeder off the back porch that he kept stocked and a set of walnut furniture in the living room that he had built himself in his 70s, and he showed Garrett the furniture the way men show things they built with their hands, briefly and without excess. Bo examined the perimeter of the living room and then lay down beside the couch where Ray was sitting, which put the dog's head approximately at the level of the old man's knee. Ray looked down at the dog for a moment and then reached over and rested his hand on Bo's neck, and they all three sat in the quiet of the hollow house with the creak sound coming through the back screen door, and it was enough. There were 8 other veterans on the visiting route. 2 of them were women. One of them, a Vietnam-era Army nurse named Clara, had a temper and an excellent memory, and made Garrett sit still for 45 minutes while she argued comprehensively about the county's management of the road maintenance budget. And he thought, while she argued, that she was probably not wrong about most of it, and that she would have made an excellent non-commissioned officer. By the end of the 3rd week, he had stopped thinking of the Ridgeview room as a temporary arrangement and started thinking of it as a room. This was a distinction that was small and also very large. He had lunch with Hector on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the break room. Hector ate the same thing most days, a sandwich and an apple and coffee, and he talked about his daughters when Garrett asked and about the county when Garrett didn't, and about the veterans he had worked alongside over 11 years in ways that were respectful and specific and that revealed over time the depth of his attention to each one of them. "You remember all of them," Garrett said one Thursday afternoon. "Most," Hector said. "The ones I've met. The ones who've come through. What about the ones who don't come back after they leave?" Hector bit into his apple and chewed and thought about it. I remember them too, he said. In case they do. Garrett put his coffee down. The break room window showed the tree line in November now, bare and specific against a gray sky, the kind of sky that promises cold without delivering yet. He thought about a man who went through a donation bin once a month for 11 years, who had a piece of dark green cloth laid on a shelf in a locker, who had told Doris Caffrey to find a veteran named Slade even though it took 14 months, and then had stood in a doorway one October morning and said, without pretense, that he had been wondering if the man would come back. He reached into his front left pocket and set the challenge coin on the table between them. Hector looked at it. He did not pick it up. I've been carrying that since the day I was promoted, Garrett said. Marine Corps tradition. You keep the coin from the day you make the next rank. It's supposed to be a reminder of the people who were there. A pause. There was one person there who mattered more than the rest. He didn't make it back from the next deployment. Hector was quiet. I lost the coin, Garrett said. Or I thought I did. I didn't have it for 14 months. That's the longest. It's been out of my hand since 2007. Hector looked at him, not at the coin. I want you to know what you kept safe, Garrett said. Not just the object. What was in it? The old man sat with that for a moment. The creak sound was not there. They were not in Ray Owen's house. The sound in the break room was the coffee maker and the furnace and distant voices from the lobby. And those sounds were enough. Thank you for telling me, Hector said. Not thank you for coming back. Not thank you for trusting me. Just the bare form of it. The gratitude for being allowed to know. And it landed with the weight of something much heavier than its syllables. Garrett picked the coin up and put it back in his pocket. 2 weeks before Christmas, he moved out of the Ridgeview Motel. He moved into a small house on Colton Street, 3 rooms and a covered porch and a yard of adequate size for a dog with the habits Bo had. The house belonged to a veteran named Dale Pruitt, 63 years old, who had served in the Gulf War and now rented out his second property from a distance, living himself near his grandchildren in Chattanooga. He and Garrett had talked on the phone twice before agreeing on terms, and Dale had said on the second call, Doris vouched for you, which apparently settled the matter. He went to the Saturday morning group meeting at the Veterans Center for the first time in the 3rd week of November. He did not say much the first time or the second. By the 3rd Saturday, he had said something about Helmand Province. Not much, a single sentence about the landscape that had surprised him by being beautiful in a way that felt wrong to notice given the circumstances. And the veteran sitting across from him, a Desert Storm Army sergeant named Mike Tolbert, had said, I know what you mean. And then there had been a particular silence that was very different from the silences Garrett had been maintaining for 2 years. On a Tuesday morning in the 1st week of December, Hector knocked on the supply room door, which Garrett had learned to use as a sort of informal office when he was doing paperwork for the visiting program. He came in with 2 coffees and sat down across the small table, and set one in front of Garrett and said, Doris says you're taking on 2 more routes in the new year. 3 more, Garrett said. Hector looked at him. Clara referred me to 2 of her friends, Garrett said. I went and met them last week. They're out near Roan Mountain. I can cover them on the same day. Hector drank his coffee. He did not say anything for a moment. You're going to need a better truck, he said finally. That road out toward Roan Mountain is rough in the winter. I know, Garrett said. I'm looking. Dale Pruitt has a truck he doesn't use, Hector said. Been sitting in the garage of the Colton Street house since he moved. I imagine he'd rent that one, too. Garrett looked at him. You've been in that garage. I maintain the property, Hector said with the exact level of innocence that is not quite innocent. Dale asked me to check on it over the summer. Garrett sat back in his chair. Bo, on the floor beside him, picked up his head and looked at Hector. You have a lot of connections, Garrett said. I know a lot of people, Hector said. That's not the same thing. Connections is when you use people. Knowing people is when you pay attention long enough that things line up sometimes. Garrett thought about that for a moment. The truck, he said. Does it run? It ran in August, Hector said. It's a 2009 Ford. Has some rust, but the engine's fine. I checked the engine. Garrett called Dale Pruitt that afternoon and arranged to rent the truck for the winter, and on a gray Saturday morning with the first snow of the season, coming down in thin and unhurried lines across the ridge, he drove it out toward Roan Mountain with Bo in the passenger seat and visited two women named Barbara Hillhouse and June Prater, both in their 80s, both Army nurses from different wars, and sat in June Prater's kitchen while she made him drink a cup of tea she described as essential for cold weather, which he drank without objecting, and which was, in fact, very good. He was driving back through the county when he passed the ridge overlook, the place where the road crested and dropped and the whole valley spread out below in the gray light, and he pulled over for a moment and sat looking at it. He had driven past places like this for 2 years. He had driven past a great deal of the country. He had done it in that particular way of a man who is not looking at what is in front of him, who is instead managing the distance between himself and whatever it is he is trying to stay ahead of. He knew that about himself. He had known it for a while. He did not feel like he was ahead of anything, looking at the valley now. He felt in the particular and specific way that a place can do this, like he had arrived somewhere. It was not a dramatic feeling. It did not announce itself. It came in the way the valley looked in the gray December light, the bare ridgeline above, and the patchwork of land below where people were doing the things that people do on a cold Saturday morning, keeping their fires going, feeding their animals, starting their trucks in their driveways, and scraping their windshields. It came in the weight of the challenge coin in his left pocket, and in the presence of Bo beside him, who was watching the valley with his ears forward, as if he too were taking stock of something. Garrett sat there for a few minutes. Then he pulled back onto the road and drove back toward Grayfield. And when he reached the town, he turned not toward the motel, which he no longer needed because the Colton Street house was his now, but toward Patton's, because it was almost noon and he had told Hector he would meet him there for lunch. And Hector, who had been telling him where things were and what things needed doing ever since a Tuesday morning in October, when a dented blue locker opened in a warm room, was already there. He was sitting at the counter with his Tuesday sandwich and his apple and his coffee, and he looked up when Garrett came in, and then looked down at Bo, and then back up at Garrett. Road was all right, Hector said. In the truck. Road was fine, Garrett said. Patty brought him coffee without being asked and went back to the far end of the counter where another customer needed something. The diner was warm and the windows were steamed, and through the steam the street outside was soft and gray and specific. Garrett put his hand in his pocket and turned the challenge coin once between his fingers. He put his hand back on the table. He picked up his coffee. Outside, the snow came down easy and steady over the ridge and the valley and the bare November trees and the rooftops of Grayfield. It fell on the Veterans Center and on the flagpole with its 2 flags, and on a house on Colton Street with a covered porch and a yard where a dog with a charcoal saddle coat would shortly be making his quiet survey of the perimeter. It fell on 7 miles of gravel road leading to a hollow where a walnut couch sat empty on a Tuesday, and where a bird feeder would need refilling soon, and where a creek ran under thin new ice at the back of a property held by an 84-year-old man who had not asked for much in several years, and who had, for the first time in longer than he could readily say, a person he expected to see again next week. Garrett Slade drank his coffee in Patton's diner and did not feel like a man passing through. There are things that find their way back to us, and sometimes we do not understand the path they took. A name on a box, a system for going through things carefully. An old man who understood, without being told, that some objects carry more than the materials they are made from. We live in a world that moves fast and discards easily, and sometimes a single pair of hands, working quietly without recognition or reward, stands between something irreplaceable and a thrift store shelf. If you know someone like Hector, someone who pays attention when it costs them something, someone who keeps what others let go of and holds it until the rightful person comes back, tell them. Not to repay the debt, because some debts cannot be repaid that way. Tell them because they are the reason some of us still have the things we need most. And if you are still out there, somewhere, carrying something by yourself that has gotten too heavy, there are rooms like the one Garrett walked into. There are people who have been waiting. The door is usually unlocked. You just have to come through it. May God keep you and the people you love. May you find the thing you thought was lost. And may there be, somewhere in your life, a Hector, patiently waiting, cloth on the shelf, light on.